By game time, the field resembled an Arctic tundra with 6 inches of snow covering the field. The players were half frozen and completely miserable as they took the field. Leo Koch brought out every trick he had learned in 17 years as the Bombers skipper. Knowing that Coach Huber had scouted Alan Koch's field goal a week before, he tried his field goal unit out in the first quarter for a try on a stalled drive at the Garfield 9. But Leo had no intention of trying for a field goal in those conditions. Alan snatched the ball from the holder and looked downfield where Danny Ruff stood alone in the end zone. The ball fluttered for a lifetime in those gale-force winds and settled into Ruff's hands for a first quarter lead. But the Bombers, as usual, float the extra point. Now, Ruff was also responsible for Garfield's first score, following a punt at his own 5. 2 plays later, Clark Cathera plunged over for a G-men score. An extra point that split the uprights made the score 7-6. It was a dispirited bunch of boys that Leo gathered in that dang freezing locker room at halftime. Telling his assistants to wait outside, Leo herded the team towards the communal shower, told them to sit down. Speaking in a quiet voice, jutting out his lower jaw the way he always did when he wanted to make a point, he said only a few words. Boys, I've never asked you for much besides having fun and playing good football. But tonight I want to ask you for something. This is my last game. I'm handing up the cleats. Do you think you could win this one for me? And then he walked out. Nobody said a word because Leo Koch had suddenly forced 25 teenagers to become men. Our own physical misery didn't mean a thing now. I won't pretend it was easy. Garfield wanted to win this rivalry game as much as we did. But in the third quarter, as it drew to an end, Danny Ruff, playing in the last game of his career, settled under a punt at his own 35, and slogging through calf-deep snow, and every single player on the Garrettsville team plowed his way 65 yards for a touchdown. It held up. The Bombers won 13-7. They won the PCL championship for their coach. But nobody celebrated on the way home because Leo Koch was gone. That 1966 season was the high point of a lot of lives, but thinking about it too much still causes a grown man to tear up. Less than 2 years later, the real heart of the team, the boys who opened the holes for Ruff, Steiner, and Pinson, guards Duke Bonnet and Jim Sullinger, were dead, killed thousands of miles away in Vietnam. They've never been forgotten. In his very last interview, 17 years later, Leo said that the 1966 team was his greatest moment in football, and he recalled Duke and Sully by name. In a tribute article published the week after the Garrettsville game, Leo cited health reasons for his retirement. He was only 43, but he was already feeling the effects of the anemia, the disease that finally brought this giant down. He still had 20 good years left in the fall of 1966. He stayed on as the Windham golf coach until his final retirement, even winning the PCL championship in 1980. He also returned as the head baseball coach in 1980 to 83. In 1971, he had come out of retirement to coach the freshman football team, a team with future Hall of Famers Dave Flavel, Robbie Garrett, Jim Christopher, Barry Lyon, and a host of other great players who became Windham's first ever playoff team. I like to think that Leo Cox fundamentals as much as Stan Parrish's brilliance that got that team there. As Leo approached the end of his teaching career in 1983, he talked incessantly about retirement, about how he hunted and fished, just like back in Glen Rock. And he spent his days golfing and bowling with his buddies. The end came much sooner than anybody thought, only 3 years later. In his last days, as his former colleagues and players visited him in the hospital, I like to think that he knew how much he'd meant in all our lives. In that final 1983 interview, he said, "My career at Windham was definitely satisfying. If I had my life to live over, I wouldn't do a thing differently." Leo Cox was a good man. What you saw was what you got. Now, there's people in this room who know he had a wilder side. And I personally never knew him much off the field. But there's so much to Leo that would take a month of speeches to cover. I talked to a lot of people about Leo over the past half year, and almost every one of them choked up at some point in the interview. But I thought that Cliff McGuire, who was my teammate on that 1966 team, might have put it simply and best. He said, "You always knew that Leo was on your side, teaching you a few things and then pulling for you to do them right. And when you finally grew up, you could sit down with him, drink a beer, and talk to him as your friend." Yeah, that was Leo.